important it is to spend less than you make.
And I'm just going to tell you how reality works. There are things that really, really matter. And there are things that don't matter a lot in your priorities. If you keep indulging yourself to consume and don't build savings, you're spending on luxuries now in exchange for a great pain later. You have to be self-sufficient plus. I don't care whether that's at a high level of income and a high level of spending, or a low level of income or a low level of spending. That's an individual choice of what kind of life they want to live. But if you're not earning more than you are spending, you will be dependent on others, and you will be vulnerable and experience a terrible time when you can't get ahead of that money. But first, if you spend more than you earn and you borrow money to do it, when you pay back, that's going to be bad. Even if you spend more than you earn because somebody gives it, them giving it to you, the only way that you're going to get freedom and healthy is by earning more than you spend and building that. I used to calculate at first how many days, weeks, months, and years could I live if money didn't come in. And I'd feel good. The only time I felt security is when I could live for an extended period of time. That gave me a sense of having both freedom and security. So my kids and my grandkids, sometimes gifts, but I give them a gold coin as a gift, and then I'll give them some other little gift, maybe a toy or something. And I told them, you're never to spend that coin through your life unless there's a real emergency. And hopefully through your life, you'll never have a need for spending that coin, those coins that you're accumulating. And when you get an income, you put it in a gold coin, you buy another gold coin, and you give it to your children. It's in your interest,
right,
to prioritize, to have a more austere, more secure capability that will give you power and independence. Everybody will learn through their experiences. When you learn through your mind and you're taught things, it's intellectual learning. It's not going to stay with you. You need visceral learning through your experiences. So we'll all learn through experiences. Then we have a problem in what do different people learn in their environments. And we're talking about that because, like I say, if I didn't have an environment that taught me the things I taught, like, the need to work hard, right, all of that, I wouldn't have learned it. And so with large wealth gaps, one of the real problems of the situation that has always been through all cycles a problem is that as one earns a lot of money or enough money, then they take care of their children in a privileged way, and the children may not have to aspire. And so you see that rich people sort of get unfair advantages, and they are also not getting some of those strengths. And you see the poor people, I see this a lot. We work, my wife and I, but particularly my wife, works in the poorest school districts in Connecticut, where there's poverty and all sorts of terrible type of environments. And in that environment, they learn differently because there's drugs, there's crime, there's gangs. There's a problem in the school systems, Connecticut. The average amount spent per student in the high school, that was a few years ago, so it's not up to date, but was $24,000. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is a poor school district, right up the road, it's $14,000 a student. So there's less money being put into that school district, they need more, because also basics like they don't have computers. And when we had COVID, they're supposed to learn on computers, but 60,000 students in Connecticut did not have computers because the families couldn't afford computers. They didn't have it part of their education system. And the society would not provide that. We bought those computers philanthropically to give them to that. And when you have environments in which that is the environment, then you learn your communities, your gangs, literally. Your income is dealing drugs, and your path is crime. That causes incarceration. That's enormously expensive. In the state of Connecticut, it's like $700 million a year because of that type of cycle. And so they learn different things. That's just the mechanics of what we're dealing with. You can't have a living standard below which people can't go. They deserve what I had, which is ideally 2 parents, at least 1 parent. Some cases they don't have that, but they need the support to get through a public school that's decent and come out to a land of equal opportunity. So the society must do that, or it will implode, it will collapse as homelessness, mental illness, drugs, and everything increasingly shift things, as we're seeing take place now. Everyone will have the different experiences, so somebody's got to rise above that. We'll have a war, an internal civil war, if we don't do that. And that's kind of where we are. And so if you see the cycles through history, that's what always happens. The capitalist gets, there's capitalism and communism. Redistribute the wealth, keep the wealth. Unfair advantages. How do you do that in a way that is healthy for the most majority of the people so they have good experiences? That's the issue of our time.
Would you be in a position to try to redefine capitalism?
First of all, let's agree that it has to work for the majority of people.
Right.
Most people. It's got to work for 70% at least of the economy. I mean, most. And let's establish the fact that there's a level below which we shouldn't let people go. And let's also establish that the society as a whole has to be productive, that it's not just giving people money. So if you keep giving people money, that's not going to be good. We talked about that. You have to build a healthy education system and convert that into productivity. Productivity is a key word. The society as a whole has to be productive to be able to then have the income, because it's not just financial income. Money it has no intrinsic value. It's what you produce. It's got to produce. So you have to be productive as a whole. Almost everybody's got to aspire to be self-sufficient plus, and you have to help them get there in order to operate. So there are wonderful things that we can do to help that. Invest and aspire to equal quality education or high. Don't lower the high levels to get equality, whatever. Aspire on how to raise the educational and security levels. In many schools right now, there's you have to go through a metal detector to make sure guns don't go into the schools. You have drugs. You have all of those things. You have to create an environment in which those children are raised well, have those basics, educated well, made them productive. We have found out, my wife, through her work, for her mission is to get high school students in the worst neighborhoods who would have dropped out through high school and into jobs. We find that can be done for about $450 a student. So if you do that, you realize that's cost effective, but it doesn't have to be our program, but in one way or another, we have to define it. We have to define capitalism as also having all-in cost. after the last great fight, the war.
Right.
Okay, you have the war, you have the pain of the war, you have the restructuring, you establish who the power is. Nobody wants war again. You take that depression, that generation, my parents' generation, who lived through depression and war, and they come out and they have learned, okay, they have learned to save, they have learned to, not get into war. And that learning and that establishing who's in control sets the stage for the prosperity that comes, that then we produce these greater wealth gaps, senses of unfairness, debt bubbles, and we do the same thing again. You have a debt bubble crisis and so on. So there's only, if you can get them to intellectually worry, and that's one of the things I'm trying to pass this thought along. Yeah. If you're worrying, you pass that along, but sometimes it's going to take experiences, and then it's going to take figuring out how to engineer it so that you get through it. So you have to have agreement by smart, reasonable people about what to do. That's just how reality works. By CITIC, which was called a window company. It was the only company that was allowed to deal with the outside world. 1978, Deng Xiaoping came to power, and he wanted to have open door policy and great reforms, and I went there. And I went there for curiosity. They didn't have any money. They couldn't pay me anything, advice. And I went there for curiosity. And I started to develop these wonderful relationships with these wonderful people about helping them develop their system, their capitalism and so on for long. And we've been long, old friends over a long period of time. It was something like 12 or 15 years I was there before I ever earned any money. And it was the satisfaction of that relationship. So, and that's continued to today. I studied the dynasties, and I've had the experiences. Since I started going, China's per capita income has increased by 28 times. Life expectancy's increased by 10 years on average. The poverty rate went from 88% to less than 1%. An amazing, the greatest economic transformation of all time. And there's a great understanding of history. That's why Xi Jinping says that there's a great storm on the horizon, a 1 in 100-year storm on the horizon. And that storm that we're facing, we're all facing it in the world. In the United States, we're talking about it, the same cycle I talked about with combination of debt, wealth gaps, this international conflict. Okay, that storm, there's a great storm on the horizon. And then there's the reactions of how do you deal with that great storm. There's internal conflict, there's external conflict. So what's happening in China now is largely what always happens in such periods of great conflict, and they know it, they've seen it through their dynasties, that everybody must line up and there's no room for fighting between ourselves. There's one side, and everybody must line up and be on that side. And if there's any wavering, okay, off with your head, or something like you're not, you have to deal with that. That's something, by the way, we're dealing with in the United States and democracies. And so, for example, in World War II, when we had the World Depression, then the conflict, let's say in Japan, by way of example, it happened with Germany in Europe, Japan in Asia. There's this conflict, the geopolitical conflict. In the geopolitical conflict, the United States cuts off oil to China, to Japan, and also freeze their assets. And when they freeze their assets, and that leads to Pearl Harbor.